Hello everyone, this is Mr. Underkoffler, and this is part 2 of the video that started with the guided notes that were called an Introduction to Slope-Intercept Form of a Linear Equation. And so we're at the page here that talks about writing equations in slope-intercept form. Follow along with me. To write an equation in slope-intercept form, which remember, that's called y equals mx plus b, you need to find two things. And this is actually really simple. You always need to have the number that will end up going in for the m and the number that will end up going in for the b. And if you recall, the m is the slope, the b is the y-intercept. Now, you're going to see a variety of problems here showing up on the next few pages. Sometimes it's going to be really easy to get the value of both the slope and the y-intercept, the m and the b. Other times it's going to take a little bit of work. Sometimes it's going to take observing things from a graph. So we'll look at a variety here of problems. But in the end, we're always going to have y being y. We're always going to have x being x. And we will actually replace the m and the b with their actual numbers, their values. Starting with super easy problem. This one's already done for you. The directions say write an equation in slope-intercept form for each line. And here's the information they're giving you. They're telling you the slope is 5. They're telling you the y-intercept is -3. It doesn't get much easier than this. We already now have our m and our b. So we will write the equation as y. Remember I said y will stay y, x will stay x, but the m and the b get replaced with the numbers. So y equals the 5, because that's the m, x, plus, well, the -3 is the b, so -3. That's it. I mean, that's really all there is. Now, when you get to Algebra 1 or in Algebra 2 and some other high-level math courses in high school, you will probably not keep it as plus negative. You will probably instead call it minus a positive. It just looks a little cleaner, a little simpler. At the pre-algebra level, I'll probably accept it either way. But when you get to higher levels of math, you'll probably just say -3 instead of plus -3. All right, I want you to try number 2 and 3 on your own. Hit pause in the video, and then hit play when you're ready to see how you did. All right, did you already do 2 and 3? If not, you better hit pause now, because I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answers. For problem number 2, y is y equals, all right, our m is the -3/4, because that's the slope. Don't forget to have the x to the right of that. X stays as x, plus our b. What's our b? Well, it's the y-intercept, which is 2. So there you go. Y equals -3/4 x plus 2. Pretty easy. Problem number 3. Again, we're doing y equals mx plus b. Who's the m? It's the 0. So y equals 0x. And then the b is the 9, so plus 9. Now, I mentioned this on the very first page called an Introduction to Slope-Intercept Form. 0x is really just 0. And obviously 0 plus 9 is just 9. So there is an alternate way of writing an equation that has 0x. That really just goes away because 0 times x is 0. And 0 plus 9 is 9. You can write it that way if you want. Now, I'm not going to force you to. But when you maybe get to higher levels of math like Algebra 2, then you'll probably end up doing that to write it in a simpler version of that equation. All right, let's make it a little bit more challenging. Let's give you some graphs. The directions have slightly changed. They're still saying write an equation in slope-intercept form, but this time they're actually giving you the graphs of the lines. Now, that does not change what we have to get. We still need to always get the slope. We still need to always get the y-intercept. Just this time, we're going to have to find them from the graph. Well, the cool thing is that the y-intercept, really easy to get from the graph. I mean, it's literally just the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Not the point where it crosses the x-axis. It's called the y-intercept. So that point is 0, -1. Now, it's really only the -1 part that we will need for the b. And then the slope, that really isn't that hard either. Go from one point to another point. We've already done this on another packet of guided notes. Start with the up and down distance. This is going up 2. That's your numerator. Remember, Change in y, the up and down, is always on top. Change in x, which is the left or right, is always in the denominator. What is that right? Well, 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right is your denominator. By the way, I always recommend counting spaces, not counting lines. That way you don't accidentally count wrong. Up 2 is positive. Right 3 is also positive. Remember, if it was going down 2, then that would have been negative. If it was going left 3, then that would have been negative. But in this case, they're both positives, so there you go. And that is already in simplest form. Some fractions you will get will not be simplest form, and you'll have to simplify them. So now that we have our slope and we have our y-intercept, now we can, boom, plug them in for the m and the b. Remember, y is always y, x is always x for the final equation. Y equals 2/3 x plus -1. And if you wanted to call that 2/3 x minus 1, that would also be acceptable. All right, let's do number 5 together. If you want to start with the y-intercept first, that actually is not a bad idea. It's really easy to find. It is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So that point here is 2 above the origin. So that is 0. Remember, the x-coordinate is always 0 if it's on the y-axis. 0, 2. It's really only the y-coordinate part that we will need for the b in y equals mx plus b. All right, what about the slope? Let's count the spaces that we need to move from this point to this point. We're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces down, and we'll make that our numerator because that's always has to be the numerator, is the change in y, the up or down direction. And then we're going to have to go 1 space to the right, and that's your denominator for the change in x. Now, let's interpret this. Down 4 is -4, but right 1 is +1. If you would like to simplify that to just -4, you can go ahead and do that because anything over 1 is just itself. All right, let's put the pieces together for the equation. We got our m, that was the -4, and we got our b, that is the 2. So y equals, instead of mx plus b, it's -4x plus 2. All right, now that I've shown you number 4 and I've guided you through number 5, go ahead and hit pause in the video, try 6 and 7 on your own, then hit play when you're ready to see how you did. All right, I hope you already did 6 and 7. Let's see how you did. Y-intercept is the point where it crosses the y-axis. This is 4 below the origin, so that's 0, -4. And again, only the b is the y-coordinate part of the ordered pair. The slope, we're going to go from this point to this point. We can go up 2, right 4. You also could have gone down 2 and left 4. Believe it or not, it wouldn't matter if you did it that way. But if you go up, oh, forgive me, I went up 1, right 2. This is actually kind of a typo. But the funny thing is, if you go up 1, right 2, you actually are at another point here on this line. So I actually don't have to change this. But if you had up 2 and right 4, well, think about this. 2 over 4 would still simplify to 1/2. And you're like, well, Mr. Underkoffler, what if I went down and then went to the left? Would that change things? Well, then you would have had a negative over a negative, and that still becomes a positive. So no matter which way you get this slope, it's going to simplify to +1/2. All right, let's write our final equation. Y equals 1/2x plus -4. If you would like to clean that up a little bit and make it y equals 1/2x minus 4, that would also be acceptable. Problem number 7. Oh, they gave us 3 dots. We have lots of options here for the slope. But before I talk about the slope, let's go ahead and talk about the y-intercept. It's the point on the y-axis. So that is 0, 0, 3. Mr. Underkoffler, this is not correct. You're going to have to fix this before you teach it to the kids live in person. That should be 0, 2. I apologize for that typo. All right, the slope. You can go from here to here. You could go from here to here. It honestly doesn't matter. You could even go up and left. You could even go, let me change colors here. You could go down, forgive me, let me count this again. Down 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, and then to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. Either way you do this, you are going to end up getting negative 2/3. Because even if you went down 4, right 6, that would be negative 4 over 6, which still would simplify to negative 2/3. And once again, I didn't fix the typo here on this part either. It should be y equals negative 2/3 x plus 2. All right, shifting gears a little bit here. What if we're not given the graph? Follow along with me. If you're not given a graph, there are other ways to get the two things we always need for slope-intercept form, which is the slope and the y-intercept. Remember from a previous packet of guided notes on slope that there is a formula that you can use for slope. y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2, or you can start with the 2's if you want, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which is the traditional way most textbooks will teach it to you. Either way will work, you just got to be consistent. And we can actually get the y-intercept by using slope-intercept form itself. Use it like a formula where you substitute everything in that you can. You'll substitute a number in for the x and in for the y, and you'll get those from an ordered pair. And then the slope, you will substitute that in for the m, and that will just leave one variable left over that you'll solve for. You'll actually solve for the b. Let me show you what I mean. Let's look at an example, and this one's already typed up for you in your guided notes, but take a look at my screen here as I show this to you. The directions say write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that passes through these points. What can I do? Let's start by finding the slope. Use the formula. Now, you might recall every ordered pair is an x and a y. I would actually probably recommend labeling it like that. And then the first ordered pair is the 1's. The second ordered pair is the 2's. We actually talked about this back on the guided notes called slope. So now you can easily substitute the numbers into the right place. The y1 is the 6, the y2 is the negative 2, subtract them. The x1 is the negative 5, the x2 is the 5, subtract them. Now, you will make subtraction become adding the opposite if you're subtracting by a negative or if you're subtracting from a negative. So make those things adding the opposite. 6 plus 2 is 8, negative 5 and negative 5 makes negative 10. This reduces to negative 4/5. So we now have our slope, but we don't have our y-intercept yet. What we can do is we can pick either of these ordered pairs. Now I went ahead and I picked the first one, which was negative 5 and 6, and that will become your x and your y to substitute into the formula y equals mx plus b. So put the 6 in for the y, put the negative 5 in for the x, and then don't forget we found the slope as negative 4/5. Put that in for the m, and it's going to look like this. Now, the b is the only variable that we do not know the value of. So we're going to do the work, and we're going to solve for b. All right, so let's do that work. Multiply negative 4/5 times negative 5. You can use a calculator if you must, although you could also do the trick I taught you earlier where you divide the negative 5 by the denominator, and then multiply that result times the numerator. So negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1. Take that times negative 4, and you get 4. A negative times a negative is a positive. Now, what's happening to the b? It's being added by 4, so we'll do the inverse. Subtract by 4, and that will give us the b by itself. Now we finally have the two parts that we need for slope-intercept form. We got the m, we got the b, put them into the equation, y equals negative 4/5 x plus 2. Remember, when you write the final equation, y goes back to just being y, x goes back to just being x. All right, let's do one together so you can get the hang of this. First part, number 9, let's get the slope. You can go ahead and label this as slopes work if you want on your notes. Let's use the formula. Who's the y1? Who's the y2? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to label these ordered pairs. We know it's x and y, x and y. And the first x and y is going to be the x1 and the y1. The second x and y is going to be the x2 and the y2. Now I can put these numbers in to the right spots. -3 is the y1, -12 is the y2. You don't really have to draw the parentheses here if you don't want to. I'm just showing it in the official way. The x1 is the 16, the x2 is the -8. Again, if you don't want to put the parentheses, you don't have to. Since we have subtraction with negatives, I'm going to make subtraction adding the opposite, and I'll also do it here, adding the opposite. -3 plus 12 will give us, sorry, I thought I had the work here, give us 9. 16 plus 8 will give us 24. Can this reduce? It can. Both these numbers are divisible by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 24 divided by 3 is 8. And now I have simplest form for the m. All right. Half of my work is done. I got the m. But I also need to get the b, the y-intercept. So I'm going to take y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to substitute in numbers for the x and the y, and I'm going to substitute in the number for the m. Remember that was 3/8. And I'll only then have one variable left, which will be the b. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the second ordered pair. Or sorry, not the second ordered pair. The first ordered pair. You could use the second. It really wouldn't matter. But I'm going to go ahead and use the first ordered pair. My y is the -3. My x is the 16. Okay, so let's start putting these things in. The -3 is the y. The 16 is the x. Who's the m? Oh, that was down here, 3/8. So that's going to go in for the m. The b is the only thing I don't know, so that stays b. All right, let's do the work. 3/8 times 16. I'm going to take the 16, divide by the denominator. 16 divided by 8 is 2. Take that answer times the numerator. 2 times 3 is 6. If you wanted to use a calculator, you could, but I'm trying to show you how you can do this without a calculator. Now, time for inverse operations. The inverse of adding by 6 is subtracting by 6. If you want to go ahead and make that subtraction become adding the opposite over here, since there was a negative above it, feel free to do that. That's going to go ahead and give you -9 for the b. All right, I now have the two things I need. M is 3/8, b is -8. By the way, if I'm going too fast in the video, you're always allowed to hit pause. You're always allowed to rewind it if you need to hear something again or to catch up with the writing. But now I have the two things I need. Let's write our final equation. Y equals 3/8 x plus -9. I said this earlier. When you write the final equation, the y goes back to y, the x goes back to x, but the m becomes its number and the b becomes its number. If you would like to write this in a slightly simpler looking way, you could call it y equals 3/8 x minus y. All right, now that I've guided you through numbers 8 and 9, I think you now should be able to do a problem, or actually two problems on your own, number 10 and number 11. So hit pause on the video, try 10 and 11 on your own, and then hit play when you're ready to see how you did. All right, I hope you have already done 10 and 11. If not, you better hit pause now because I'm going to start revealing the work. Let's start with the slope. We'll use the formula. 4 minus 10, 4 minus -8. Since there is a negative involved here in the denominator, I'm going to make that adding the opposite. Whether you make it adding the opposite up here is up to you. I think most of you know a smaller positive minus a bigger positive will give you a negative result, so that's -6. 4 plus 8 is 12. This will reduce to -1/2. Now, time for the y-intercept. But here's the deal. I don't know which ordered pair you picked. Most of you probably picked the first ordered pair, 4 and 4, and that would go in for your x and your y. But some of you might have picked the second ordered pair, and then the 10 would go in for the y, and the -8 would go in for the x. I'm actually going to show you both methods. You can skip the part of the video where I go over the method that you did not personally do, but make sure you check your work for whichever way you did it. For those of you who used 4, 4, here's what your work is going to look like. You put 4 in for the y, you put 4 in for the x. Remember, the negative 1/2 was the m. Negative 1/2 times 4 is negative 2. The inverse of adding by negative 2 is subtracting by negative 2, but since you're subtracting by a negative, you'll actually end up adding by a positive. So 4 plus 2 will give you the y-intercept of b for being 6. Now, for those of you who did the other ordered pair, here's what your work is going to look like. You put negative 8 in for the x. You put 10 in for the y. If you accidentally flip-flop those, go ahead and hit pause right now in the video and fix your work. But if you didn't flip-flop them, let's continue. Negative 1/2 times negative 8 is positive 4. The inverse of adding by 4 is subtracting by 4, and that will also give you 6. So check it out. I don't care which ordered pair you used. Both of them will work, and there's your proof. Final equation, y equals negative 1/2 x plus 6. And finally, problem number 11. Let's start with the work for the slope. The formula. Substitute the numbers in. We do have negative numbers here with the subtraction problem, so I'm going to add the opposite here. I'm going to add the opposite here. Negative 12 plus negative 3 is negative 15. Negative 14 plus negative 7 is negative 21. We know a negative over a negative will simplify to a positive, but can 15 and 21 also simplify? They can. They're both divisible by 3. If you didn't do this, do it now. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 21 divided by 3 is 7. A negative over a negative, I already said this, is a positive. Okay, time for the work of the y-intercept. Again, I don't know which order pair you picked. So for those of you who picked the first order pair, that work will be over here. For those of you who picked the second order pair, which maybe more of you picked that because they're positive numbers, which might be a little bit simpler. So that work will be over on that part of my screen. Okay, those of you who picked the negatives, did you remember to put the x in for the x and the y in for the y? Remember, the first number on the left is the x, but x is to the right side of the equal sign. I know that's kind of a little flip-flop, but that's just the way it is. The y here is the negative 12. If you accidentally flip-flop them, hit pause on the video and fix it. Remember, the slope was 5/7. 5/7 times negative 14 is negative 10, because 14 divided by 7 is 2, times 5 is 10, and you put the negative there. The inverse of adding by negative 10 is subtracting by negative 10, but since we're subtracting by a negative, that really is just adding a positive. So negative 12 plus 10 will give you negative 2 for B. For those of you who chose 7 and 3, this work might be a little simpler because they're positives, but again, did you put the 7, which is the x, did you put it in for x? Did you put the 3, that is the y, in for the y? 5/7 times 7 is just 5, because 7 divided by 7 is 1, times 5 is 5. The inverse of adding by 5 is subtracting by 5, and 3 minus 5 is also negative 2. So again, I don't care which way you did it, both methods of work will give you negative 2 for the B. And that makes our final equation, y equals 5/7 x plus negative 2, or you could write it the alternate way, y equals 5/7 x minus 2. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes part 2 of the guided notes on slope-intercept form. There is one more page. That final page is independent practice, and I will have solution sheets provided for you or possibly online. So this is it for this video. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.